Sometimes the silence confuses you. You look at your phone, you replay the last conversation, and you start asking yourself questions that don't deserve your peace. You think if he's not contacting you, then he must not care. That's not always the truth. Sometimes a man goes quiet because he's fighting with himself. He's wrestling with thoughts he doesn't know how to explain, emotions he was never taught how to express, and a realization that's slowly waking him up. Silence isn't always an ending. Many times it's the space where understanding is being built. Silence doesn't mean indifference, and that's where most people get it wrong. When someone stops contacting you, the first reaction is to assume the worst, believe that quiet equals lack of care. But silence is often louder than words because silence is where real thinking happens. When a man goes quiet, it doesn't automatically mean he has moved on emotionally. Many times it means he is overwhelmed by thoughts he doesn't know how to organize. He is replaying moments, conversations, and situations in his mind, trying to understand what went wrong and what he might lose if things truly end. Men are not always taught how to communicate emotions clearly, so instead of talking, they retreat inward. In that silence, he is facing himself. He is questioning his decisions, his effort, and his priorities. He is realizing things he ignored when communication was constant. When you were always there, when messages were flowing and access was easy, there was no urgency to reflect. Silence creates urgency. It forces awareness. The absence of your voice becomes noticeable in ways your presence never was. That's not because you weren't valuable before, because people often recognize value when it's no longer guaranteed. Silence also removes distractions. When there are no messages to respond to and no explanations being offered, a man is left alone with his thoughts. He starts connecting emotional dots. He notices the peace you brought, the support you gave, the stability you represented. He remembers how you showed up when things were difficult. And those realizations don't always lead to immediate action because awareness comes before courage. First, he has to admit to himself what your absence actually means. Indifference is careless. Silence is intentional. Indifference doesn't think, doesn't reflect, doesn't replay memories. Silence does all of that. Silence asks questions like, why does this feel different? And why do I miss this connection? It creates discomfort, and discomfort leads to growth. When a man feels that discomfort, he starts understanding emotions he once avoided. He may not reach out right away because he's trying to make sense of what he feels without saying the wrong thing or coming back empty-handed. This is why silence should never be confused with being forgotten. Silence can be a sign that something is being processed at a deeper level. It's the pause before clarity, the space where realization forms. While you're thinking nothing is happening, he's internally confronting truths he avoided before. Silence isn't the absence of feeling. It's often the presence of too many feelings at once. Men process emotions privately before they take action, and that reality confuses a lot of people because it looks like distance, coldness, even lack of care from the outside. But for many men, emotions are not something they were taught to talk through out loud. From an early age, they learn to deal with feelings internally, to sit with them, analyze them, and figure them out alone. So when something meaningful happens, especially when someone important pulls back, a man doesn't always reach for his phone. He reaches into his own thoughts. When communication stops, that's when the mental work begins. He starts replaying moments that once felt normal. Conversations he didn't think twice about suddenly carry weight. Words you said casually now sound different in his mind. He begins to see patterns, not just in the connection, but in himself. He asks why certain things mattered more than he admitted. Why your absence feels heavier than he expected. That kind of realization doesn't happen in noise. It happens in quiet. Before a man acts, he wants clarity. He wants to understand what he feels and why he feels it. Acting too soon without understanding feels risky to him. He doesn't want to reach out confused, unsure, or emotionally exposed without knowing where he stands. So he waits. He thinks. He measures his emotions against his pride, his fears, and his sense of responsibility. That waiting period can look like neglect, but it's often preparation. Private processing is also about control. Men are uncomfortable acting from pure emotion without direction. They want to be certain. Certain that they miss you. Certain that the connection mattered. Certain that if they come back, they can do it with intention and not just impulse. That certainty takes time. During that time, he's noticing things he once overlooked: the emotional safety, the encouragement, the consistency. Things that didn't seem urgent until they were gone. This internal processing is why sudden messages often come after long silence. It's not random. It's the result of weeks or months of reflection, finally reaching a point where thought turns into action. He doesn't come back because of loneliness alone. He comes back because understanding has replaced denial. He realizes that what he lost wasn't replaceable, and that realization doesn't happen overnight. So when you see silence, it doesn't always mean he's disconnected. It can mean he's deeply connected in a way he doesn't yet know how to express. Men don't always move fast emotionally, but when they move, it's usually because they've already done the thinking. The action you're waiting for is often built quietly, one thought at a time. Distance creates clarity, even though it feels uncomfortable at first. When two people are constantly connected, emotions get blurred by routine. Messages become habits, conversations become expected, and presence becomes something assumed instead of appreciated. When distance enters the picture, everything sharpens. What once blended into everyday life suddenly stands out. The absence forces awareness, and awareness brings clarity that constant closeness never could. When you step back, you're not creating confusion, you're removing noise. Without constant communication, a man is left to observe his own feelings without influence. He can't rely on reassurance, attention, or familiarity to distract himself from the truth. He has to confront what your absence actually means to him. Does he feel lighter, or does he feel the weight of something missing? That question alone changes everything, and most men don't answer it immediately. They sit with it. They let it follow them into quiet moments, into late nights, into ordinary situations where they expect you to be present and realize you're not. Clarity often arrives through contrast. He compares life with you in it to life without you in it. Not in a dramatic way, but in subtle moments. A problem arises and there's no one to talk it through with. A small success happens and there's no familiar voice to share it with. Those moments stack up, and with each one, the truth becomes harder to ignore. Distance removes the illusion that things will always stay the same. It introduces the reality that access can be lost. That realization changes perception. What was once taken for granted becomes valuable. What felt replaceable suddenly feels rare. He starts understanding that your presence added depth to his life, not just companionship. You weren't just someone to talk to. You were someone who grounded him, challenged him, and brought balance. Distance highlights that in ways closeness never did. Clarity also exposes responsibility. In silence, he has no one else to blame. He can't point to misunderstandings or distractions. He has to look at his own actions, his own effort, and his own consistency. Distance asks hard questions without saying a word. Did he show up fully? Did he listen? Did he protect the connection or assume it would survive without care? Those questions stay with him because there's no immediate way to escape them. And while you might think distance pushes people away, it often pulls truth forward. It forces honesty, not just about the connection, but about readiness and intention. Clarity doesn't rush. it unfolds. And when it arrives, it doesn't come as emotion alone. It comes as understanding. Understanding that what was lost mattered. Understanding that absence has meaning. Understanding that some connections don't fade when quiet begins, they reveal themselves. Pride can delay contact longer than emotion ever could, and that's one of the hardest truths to accept when you're waiting in silence. A man may feel the pull to reach out, feel the absence deeply, and still choose not to make that call or send that message. Not because he doesn't care, but because pride stands in the way. Pride tells him to hold back, to appear strong, to avoid looking uncertain or vulnerable. It convinces him that silence protects his dignity, even when that silence costs him peace. Inside, there's a conflict happening. One part of him wants connection, clarity, and reassurance. The other part wants control, self-respect, and emotional safety. Pride often wins at first because it feels safer than vulnerability. Reaching out means admitting that your absence affected him. It means acknowledging that something mattered more than he expected. And for a man who has learned to equate strength with emotional restraint, that admission feels risky. Purpose, however, has a different kind of pull. It doesn't rush. It waits until pride weakens. Over time, purpose starts asking deeper questions. What is actually important? What kind of man does he want to be? What does it cost him to stay silent? Pride protects the ego, but purpose protects the future. And when those two collide, purpose eventually wins. As time passes, pride loses its power because reality keeps showing up. He notices the emotional gap that pride can't fill. He realizes that staying quiet doesn't bring relief, it brings restlessness. He understands that silence didn't solve anything, it just delayed the inevitable truth. Pride can keep someone away temporarily, it can erase connection. Purpose reminds him that meaningful things require courage, not distance. That's when the shift begins. Not dramatic, not sudden, but intentional. He starts considering action instead of avoidance. He thinks less about how he looks and more about how he feels. Less about winning and more about aligning with what matters. Purpose pushes him to step out of comfort and toward growth. It urges him to choose honesty over appearance. When a man returns after silence, it's often because pride has finally stepped aside. He's no longer trying to protect an image. He's trying to honor a realization. Purpose doesn't allow him to stay comfortable forever. It nudges him toward what feels right, even if it feels uncomfortable. That's why the return doesn't come immediately. It comes when intention replaces hesitation and when pride no longer speaks louder than truth. Absence exposes value in a way constant presence never can. When someone is always available, their effort, care, and consistency slowly become part of the background, not because they aren't important, but because familiarity dulls awareness. People get used to what they have access to. They stop noticing the emotional contributions that make life smoother, calmer, and more balanced. It's only when that access is removed that the true weight of someone's presence becomes clear. When you step away, you don't take your value with you, you reveal it. The space you leave behind starts speaking. He notices the silence where encouragement used to be. The calm that once came from a simple conversation is no longer there. The understanding he relied on without realizing it is suddenly missing. These realizations don't come from nostalgia alone. They come from daily life continuing without the emotional support he quietly depended on. Value is often misunderstood as something loud or dramatic. In reality, value is subtle. It shows up in patience, consistency, listening, and presence. Those things are easy to overlook when they're constant. Absence removes the illusion that those qualities were automatic. It shows that they were intentional, chosen, and rare. He begins to understand that not everyone offers the same emotional depth. Even if they offer attention, this is why absence creates reflection instead of replacement. Distraction may come and go. Comparison happens naturally. He measures interactions with others against what he had with you. Not because he's trying to hold on to the past, because meaningful connections set a standard. And once that standard is set, surface level interactions feel empty. Absence sharpens that contrast. Real value also challenges comfort. When you're gone, there's no one to absorb emotional weight, no one to smooth out rough days, no one to automatically understand his moods. That discomfort forces awareness. He realizes that what you gave wasn't common. It wasn't easily replaced. It required effort, care, and emotional maturity. And realizing that often brings respect that wasn't fully expressed before. Absence doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply exists and allows truth to rise. And the truth is, people rarely miss someone because of what that person said. They miss them because of how life felt with them around. The emotional environment you created becomes more valuable in memory than it ever was in routine. That's when value turns into realization, and realization becomes the reason someone feels pulled back, even if they don't yet know how to express it. Growth happens in the gap before the return. Even though that gap feels uncertain and uncomfortable, the space between connection and contact is not empty time. It is active time. It's where reflection, maturity, and emotional awareness quietly develop. When communication stops, both people are forced to sit with reality instead of avoiding it. For a man especially, that gap becomes a place where lessons settle in without distraction. In the absence of constant interaction, patterns become visible. He starts recognizing his own habits, his responses, and his emotional blind spots. Things he once brushed off or minimized now stand out clearly. He understands where he gave less than he should have and where he assumed things would remain unchanged. Growth doesn't arrive as a sudden realization. It builds slowly, thought by thought, moment by moment, as life continues without the comfort he once had. This gap also teaches emotional responsibility. Without you there to carry emotional weight, he has to carry it himself. He feels the consequences of his choices directly. There's no one to soften disappointment, no one to immediately understand his silence or frustration. That responsibility is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. It pushes him to develop emotional strength instead of relying on someone else's stability. Time in separation removes illusion. When you're constantly connected, it's easy to believe things will always work themselves out. The gap challenges that belief. It introduces the possibility of permanent loss. That possibility forces honesty. He has to confront whether he's willing to lose something meaningful or willing to grow enough to protect it. That internal decision matters more than any words exchanged. Growth in the gap also reshapes intention. If he does consider returning, it's no longer about habit or convenience. It's about alignment. He begins to think about what returning would actually mean, whether he can show up with more effort, more consistency, and more awareness, whether he can meet the standard the absence revealed. Growth prepares him for that responsibility, or it reveals that he's not ready for it. This period changes dynamics permanently. Even if contact resumes, it doesn't go back to what it was before. Awareness has been created, boundaries have been felt, value has been recognized. Growth leaves a mark. It teaches that access is not automatic and connection requires care. That lesson stays whether the relationship continues or not. The gap isn't punishment, it's preparation. It prepares one person for clarity and the other for self-respect. It shows what remains when noise is removed. Growth doesn't announce itself, but it shows in changed behavior, in intentional action, and in a deeper understanding of what truly matters.